Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Footy and Stuff podcast. This is episode 15. If you're new here, welcome back. If you're no, no, if you're new here, welcome. If you're not new here, welcome back. That's great. That's staying in. I'm silly, but I'm not backtracking. First take, we're doing it. Um, where was I going with that? We took a little 2 week break. That's where I was going to go before I completely fumbled my words and had to backtrack. We took a little 2 week break. I didn't intend to do it. I was kind of just sitting there and I was like, don't really want to film a pod this week. And that happens and it's fine. I have fun doing it, but sometimes you just want to step back for a little bit. So we are back after 2 weeks. Thank you for sticking around if you did watch the last one. But yeah, today we're doing surprise all Australian players. Now, I'll talk about ground rules for that when we get to it. However, we are going to start with news as per usual. But before I do, actually, I want to say thank you to everyone, particularly on YouTube, who has sort of passed through in the last couple of weeks, because I've seen a nice upturn in the growth of the pod purely based on views and interaction. And YouTube's actually doing quite well. So I do want to say thank you to everyone who has supported, everyone who's commented, anyone who's passed by. If you've subscribed, thank you for that. There aren't many of you, but it's slowly growing, and I appreciate that. And I can see it going somewhere, and it gives me a little bit more motivation. Alrighty, let's start with that news then. There hasn't actually been a lot in this 2 week period since I last recorded a pod, in terms of news, which is fine because it makes my job a little bit easier. Not as much to touch on. But where should we start? Should we go from least noteworthy to most noteworthy, maybe? No, we'll start at the top of this list. North Melbourne have won the AFLW Grand Final. Congratulations to them. As I've said previously, I haven't really been covering as much AFLW content on this podcast as I intend to down the line, further down the line. But still keeping a massive eye on it as per usual. This game in particular was really good for North Melbourne. I thought Brisbane were a little bit off. Because what I've known from Brisbane, and I mean, you only have to look at the last grand final and the season to date so far. These two teams have obviously been the two most dominant groups in the competition, but Brisbane just didn't really seem themselves, in my opinion. But I don't know. That's just me. Anyway, but yeah, amazing win from the Roos in the end. A fantastic group of players as well. A well-deserving group of players. Like there are players there who have won flags before, Libby Birch and Emma Carney at the Dogs and whatnot, but they deserved it as a Kangaroos group because they're probably the only really good team to have not won a flag to this point. Brisbane have their flags, the Crows have their flags, the D's won theirs, so North deserve to get theirs for sure. They're probably going to get another one at least as well. And Jasmine Garner got her best on ground medal as well, which I thought, man, if they had snubbed her of that after snubbing her of so many votes on BNF night. Granted, Emma Carney was very good as well. You could have given it to either of them. But regardless, well on to North. And we can move on there. Indigenous All-Stars news. I don't know how long ago this was. Like, when you don't record a pod for 2 weeks, you're like, is this even, like, do people care to hear this from my mouth anymore? Maybe there's someone listening who doesn't know. Xavier Clark will coach the Indigenous All-Stars team when they face Fremantle next year. Michael O'Loughlin is the chair of the selection panel for that team as well, which includes a host of selectors that I didn't note down. Nice one, Brandon. Let's quickly ignore me. Ignore me. I'm filling time, space for audio listeners so they know that their pod doesn't cut out. There we go. Yep. Yep. There we go. We found it. So the panel that'll be joining Mickey O will be Chad Wingard, Paulie Vandenberg, Tanya Hosh, Laura Kane, and Josh Marnie. There we go. That's bad. I actually wrote these notes like a week ago. Like I wasn't recording the pod, but I still was prepping for it. So I just didn't write them down and didn't read it properly before I sat down today to record. That's my excuse for that mishap. But we're going to leave it in. We're not going to do it again. Stuff it. Chris Grant departs the Western Bulldogs this week as their head of football. Seems somewhat abrupt. I mean, he's, as is the story, he's been a Bulldogs man for the last, 30 years? Like he's just been at the club forever. So somewhat abrupt. I don't know the finer details of why he's left. I don't know if they've been revealed. But list boss Sam Power has stepped in as the interim head of football for the meantime, and they will look to fill that role with a full-time candidate leading into 2025. The only other news that I have here is that Brad Crouch has retired from the AFL shortly after being relisted in the rookie draft by St Kilda as well. So I don't know the ins and outs of that and why they did that if he was retiring. May have decided after. I don't know. It's not my forte knowing the ins and outs of that stuff. The Saints have invited Harry Boyd, a sample ruckman, to train on for his spot, so potentially another ruck prospect there, depending on what happens. Obviously, they just picked up Alex Dodson in the draft, so they have options there, but we'll see what happens for them. All right, very efficient from me. That was good. We are on nice and quick to the Surprise All Australian segment of the pod that we're all here for. So what I've done is I've taken one player from each AFL team that could be a surprise All Australian for 2025. Now, my definition of surprise All Australian might be a little bit more strict than what some other people's are. It might not be. I feel like there's a bit of a blurred line for what is surprise, but I feel like I can justify all of these. That's the easiest way I can explain my parameters for this. Is it justifiably a surprise, if that makes sense? So I'm not picking players who have been All Australian or been in the 40, but it just feels like it has to be someone who would have to do some work to make it in that sort of conversation, if that makes sense. I think that's the easiest way to explain it. We're just going to get into it. And we're going to start with Adelaide. Now, for the Crows, the first player of this podcast, I've gone with Riley Thilthorpe. Now, I looked back at previous seasons' All Australian teams. The last four in particular are the key ones for me. And there's been a recent trend of a star key forward who's been sort of waiting in the wings a bit, has shown their quality. Everyone knows they're going to be a good player, but they're just waiting for them to burst out the gates and have that career best defining season. So this year we had Jake Waterman, very deserved All-Australian Blazer there, outstanding season, burst out the gates out of nowhere, no one expected it. Nick Larkey last year kicked like 70-odd goals and made the All-Australian team. The year before that was Charlie Curnow, always injured, never really did much, came in, won his first Coleman, got to the All-Australian team. The year before that was Harry Mackay, who never kicked more than 30 goals in a season, and then won the Coleman and made the All-Australian team. So it feels like there's always one. It's always like there's room for that third key forward behind a Jeremy Cameron and a whoever else has been there, Tom Hawkins, whoever else. This year it would be Charlie Curnow and Jesse Hogan maybe, and then a third. There's always room for that one surprise key forward, and I think if Riley Thilthorpe has a full year and a proper go at it as the main man this year, it could be terrific. He's the only proper key forward I've put in this list. Sorry for the early spoiler, but I've not picked any others. But I thought the signs that he showed when he came back into the Crows side this year were fantastic. He put on some muscle, looked really dominant. Kicked 15 goals in 7 games. So you're looking between, on average, that 40 to 50 mark for a full year. And if he's even fitter and he gets that full preseason under his belt, watch out for this bloke, honestly. If they're operating through him predominantly, I think he could be a scary matchup for any key defender this year. Obviously, 2024, he averaged 11.1 disposals, 4.6 marks, and 2.1 goals a game. So, as I said, if he plays a full season, full 23 games, you're looking between 40 and 50 goals. If he's even better this season than he was in that back end, because he'll be fitter, as I said, could be over 50 goals. You could be looking at a really good forward. Brisbane, I've gone with Kyle Oman. This might be one of the less controversial calls on this list based on what we saw from him on grand final day in particular, but just what we know about this guy now, that he can take a game by the scruff of the neck and really make an impact and make something out of it. But the key here is Kyle Oman's home and away form, and obviously it didn't stack up to the league's premier small forwards last year. It was never going to, with the level that he was at. However, as I said, that grand final game was such a coming of age performance for the kid. Such a coming of age performance. And the amount of confidence that he'll take out of that going into next year will be enormous. He's playing in the best team in the comp as well. He's got arguably the best small forward of the last 5 years next to him in Charlie Cameron. And if he happens to match that level or even surpass him, which he will eventually, he's in the mix. Like Charlie Cameron is the blueprint for what Kyle Oman has to do. I don't think it'd take an awful lot for him to jump into considerations. As I said, it's probably one of the less controversial ones, one of the ones that's maybe the closest. But yeah, a little bit more consistency, a nice handful of big performances in big games for him, like what he delivered against Sydney, and I think he's a shot. 2024, he averaged 11.6 disposals, 1.3 goals a game, and 5.2 score involvements a game. A key point with stats like the score involvements is that he's basically doubled his output from 2023 to 2024. So the improvement between those 2 years was massive. And I think he definitely has the ability from that to improve even more noticeably in 2025. So he's definitely got it in him, in my opinion. Carlton. I'm going with Blake Acres. I've gone with Blake Acres. Carlton's playing list in the context of this video is very interesting because obviously we have such an extensive group of absolutely elite players who wouldn't be a shock at all. Like you look at purely the players who have done it before, Cripps, Walsh, Kerno, Mackay, Wiedering, Sard, Doherty, they've all done it before. TDK could be at that level now. Like we've seen that from him. Nick Newman's had a couple of elite years as well, finishing top three in the BNF and playing really good football. And then there are a lot of players underneath that where it's just hard to justify it as much that they could even be in with a sniff of All Australian. But one of those players who I think falls in the middle of those two groups is Blake Acres. I think Carlton fans every year, including myself, until it happens, would probably say in conversations about the All Australian team, man, Blake Acres could have that year this year. Like he's that kind of player, isn't he? We all know what we get out of him as Carlton fans. And I think he's a top five wingman in the comp as well. I honestly believe that. But is that even controversial at all? I don't know. The way this team is selected every year obviously works against him. We know that. There's only ever going to be one wingman, maybe even none, depending on how midfielders play and what types of midfielders are selected for the team. So you'd have to have a proper, like, best wingman in the competition kind of season to even be in consideration. Matching the output of Errol Goulden, beating out guys like Josh Dacos. Massimo D'Ambrosio's up there now as well. So those are the types of players that he's competing with. And it wouldn't surprise me if he can do that because of how highly I think of Blake as a player. But it would certainly be a surprise, I think, to the broader AFL fan base. And a welcome one at that, I would hope. You know, Blake Acres is at his best. He racks up possessions. He kicks goals, sometimes multiple in a game. He could pop up for two in a quarter. Match-winning goals. He did it multiple times in finals last year. Goals to spur the team on. But suddenly you'll see him track back and tap a ball over the line and save a certain goal, maybe a match-winning goal for the other team. Like his work rate is tremendous. That's probably the thing I love the most about him, that he can do it at both ends. I think this could be, I think this could be one of the most feasible ones on this list. Not in the sense that it's likely, but that it's justifiable based on how he plays, if that makes sense. I know he can do it eventually, but as I said, he's also one of those players that, as a fan base, we back in, and we're always going to float it until it happens. So yeah, fingers crossed for that one anyway. But I'd love to see it. 2024, he averaged 22.4 disposals a game, 6 marks, and 4.3 intercepts, which is ranked elite. So he has that side of his game as well. He's very good. So yeah, Carlton Blake Acres for me. Collingwood, I've gone with Harry Perryman, the new recruit. It felt like the most natural one on this Collingwood list to go with. Well, first things first, everyone, including myself, talked about the price tag that's been attached to Harry Perryman, and the general consensus seems to be that they've overpaid for him. However, we know he's a good player. He's in that perfect age bracket at 26, 27 years old, where he probably does have some growth still left in him. How do you silence the doubters? You come out and deliver on every expectation and more for the Pies and what they've set for you. If his contributions across halfback and through the middle are as good as just about anyone in there, why can't he? That's kind of where I stand with him. They're kind of another team, the Pies, that have a very solid list of elite players who you know can do it and have done it and did it in their premiership year. And much like Blake Acres at the Blues, Harry Perryman's kind of just in that next bracket for me. He's there, like he's good, but he'd need to improve a little bit and have that kind of season. But yeah, I think depending on how they choose to deploy him, it's a lot comparing him to one of the greatest players of all time. But for me, as Scott Pendlebury transitions out of that mix, Perryman could very well be that Scott Pendlebury type of player in there for them, that reliable, strong presence. And I'm not going to shy away from the money opinion that we've spoken about previously, but I'm certainly privy to the fact that he could very easily come out and prove us wrong. So I like the Harry Perryman shout, in my opinion, and it would be a surprise for sure. Essendon, Jai Caldwell. It's another one that's again like I made a point of saying my definition for surprise is a little bit blurred because he's very good. He's a very good player, Jai Caldwell, but he's also a midfielder, and he'd have to really step it up to that next level to do it. And it would be like a whoa, Jai Caldwell, how good is he this year? So kind of a surprise. I'm a big Jai Caldwell fan for sure. I think what he dished up last year was really good. A solid ball winner at best, great goal sense, hard at it, very good in the contest. Fantastic tackler as well, great tackler. I think he has all the elements to be a really elite midfielder, and with a Bombers rise up the ladder, which we kind of speak about every year at this point, but it will happen eventually. He's definitely one of the closest players on this list to really making that jump into elite status. I think potentially the big thing for Jai though, and this kind of goes for most Essendon players to be fair, like it's not a Jai Caldwell problem more than it is a problem of what is happening at Essendon right now, is just that consistency. It's perhaps the role as well. Like he could do with more midfield minutes, but that consistency is the key. Like he's been good all season, I think, but from a pure statistical standpoint, this season, he's had games where he's dropped 30 plus disposals, a goal, other games where he's had 10 plus tackles in a game. I think bringing all those elements together more often will get him noticed, obviously, because he's still contributing well, having 20 touches and 5 tackles in a game, but he's not getting noticed doing it. So he's not going to be at that level having those numbers. I like him though. I think he can definitely do it, especially when everyone around him improves, as I said. 2024 averaged 22.7 disposals, 6.5 tackles, 4.3 clearances, and I think just under a goal. So the evidence is there. Like he's a very good player, but it's just that next level. And with the players like him in the league, he's got a lot of competition, and I think that adds to the surprise factor of this one as well. Fremantle. This is one of my favorite ones. I genuinely think this one could happen. Heath Chapman. Heath Chapman at Freo. We spoke about Heath Chapman previously in one of the draft videos, and I still think he's just so close to having that proper breakout year and announcing himself to everybody because he's still somewhat unassuming back there for the Dockers. I think as a team, they're a really good chance to make that jump this year, and he's going to be a huge part of it with what he brings. He's a big body, great defender, but he's quick for his size, unbelievable user of the football, going at 82.6% this year, which is just elite. I think about how their backline is set up with Pierce, Ryan, who's the accumulator, but he's also very solid one-on-one. Jordan Clark and guys like Brandon Walker providing that speed and run off the flanks. I just think he offers something so different to any of those guys. His versatility, how expansive his abilities are. Like Luke Ryan's all Australian. Alex Pearce gets the credit he deserves more often than not. Jordan Clark's similar. But I think Heath Chapman could easily be the best. Yeah, I'm gonna stand on it. I think he could easily be the best defender in this back line should he stay fit in 2025. Keep an eye on it. We'll talk about it at the end of next year, but I do like him, and I think he could do something very special in 2025. 2024, he averaged 16.1 disposals, 5.8 marks, and 82.6% disposal efficiency per game, as I said. So just like, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. Frio fans, tell me if I'm like stupid, please. Geelong next. I've gone with Sean Manor. Another player kind of like what I spoke with Kai Lohman before, where it's easy to single them out based on what he dished up at the back end of last year. Because those last few rounds and that qualifying final in particular were unreal for him. But he has the potential to sustain that form in 2025. Coming into the league last year as a mature age draftee, 27 years old, he's probably just about to peak. Has some really solid forwards to work with around him as well. And while he hasn't really stood out as much as a Brian Myers or a Tyson Stengel, he has that ability to push up the ground and impact at stoppage that they don't necessarily have as much. And I think the most important point with Mana is that he played twice in the first few rounds. I think it was round 1 and 2, maybe round 1, 2, 3. I don't know what it was. I don't have that information with me, and I'll get better at that. But he then didn't play again until round 18. So it took him a little bit to get it going, and he wasn't really afforded as much of an opportunity to get that consistency. So I'd really love to see what he can do in a full 23 game season. It'd be very interesting because what we saw from him after he settled in ahead of finals and had that, I think it was like 5 games, whatever it was, leading into finals, he has the potential with a bit of consistency to be another massive X factor for the Cats, which they have quite a few of already. So I think it could be quite exciting. 2024, he averaged 16.3 disposals a game, 4.5 tackles, and 1.3 goals a game. So he's always good for a goal. I think it could be very exciting. It's one to watch for sure. Gold Coast, I've gone with Bodie Hewland. I'm unsure how many people actually realise this guy finished second in the Gold Coast Best and Fairest last year. Like I think he's genuinely the definite. I talked about Heath Chapman before and how unassuming he is. This guy's unassuming because he really had a fantastic year. And he's someone that's becoming increasingly reliable for Damien Hardwick at the Suns as well as he improves this side as a whole. He's extremely hard at it, but he's also become a terrific defender and a very solid presence in the Suns backline this year, which seems to have provided a little bit of relief to those key defenders in the Suns backline. Charlie Ballard, Sam Collins, who's the only one who outpolled him in the BNF as well. But he also has some rebounding power too, which helps in transition. They're bringing in Daniel Rioli and John Noble this season, and it's going to be very interesting for him because I think he can learn a lot from them in terms of that attacking side of his game. And obviously, he's not the same type of player at all. But I think the more he plays, having had those 20 plus games this season, the better he'll get in all areas ultimately. I'm pretty excited to see him play next year in a Suns outfit that, as I said, is improving by the day and should from the get go be more improved across the board in 2025 for sure. 2024, he averaged 14.9 disposals a game, 5 marks a game, and he's going at 79.6% disposal efficiency as well, which for a player of his type is very good. Very good. GWS have gone with Finn Callaghan. Finn Callaghan's been pretty damn good up until this point in a very solid GWS midfield. It's hard for him to stand out in there, but he does his job, and that's the most important thing in my opinion. He would need some improvement overall to hit those All-Australian heights for sure, but with some of his midfield partners getting towards the back end of their careers, I'm talking Canelio, Kelly, so on and so forth, I'd love to see him take a huge step in 2025, and there's no reason why he can't do that. I think as a midfielder, he's a fairly complete type of player, very strong. He'll be an impressive contested player. He can tackle. He's steadily improving that defensive side of his game. He can get forward and contribute there as well, which is important. And I think at 21 years old, he's going to keep maturing quite nicely. And I think he could be a very difficult player to stop over the coming years. Playing alongside Tom Green as well. He's the perfect kind of elite level player to learn from. I'm pretty excited to see it, and it seems like he could make that proper jump sooner rather than later, in my opinion. 2024, he averaged 22.9 disposals a game, 3.6 tackles a game, and 3.4 clearances a game. I think with midfielders like Finn Callaghan, it's easy to justify it being a surprise because of the level of some of the midfielders in this competition. Like, he's a lot better than a lot of the players on this list, but the level of player that he's competing with is just like he would have to improve a lot. So that's kind of where I've justified the addition of certain midfielders in this list. Moving on to Hawthorn, Connor McDonald. Connor McDonald. This guy's been fantastic for the Hawks. That forward line, that group of smalls, has been amazing to watch. McDonald, Moore, Ginnivan, Watson. I think Connor McDonald's potentially my favourite of the lot, though. Potentially my favourite of the lot. Obviously, his eye for goal is fantastic. He's a brilliant contributor going forward, but he's a terrific user of the football as well. And he's someone that they can trust to move into stoppages and display that midfield craft. He's super versatile across that forward half of the ground. And he's someone that Sam Mitchell will be able to rely on more and more when it comes to attacking plays and transition from midfield into that forward 50. I love what he does, and I think he has plenty of scope to become one of the best mid forwards that the competition has to offer very soon. I really mean that. I think he's that good of a player. 2024, he averaged 17.4 disposals a game, 6.2 score involvements a game, and 1.1 goals a game. I think he'll definitely up his contributions on the goal side of things for sure. And even when he gets more ball, he's just going to be a lot more impactful. I really can't wait to see what this guy does in the future. Melbourne. Melbourne was a bit of a tough one. I went with Trent Rivers, though, and I'm pretty comfortable with the choice in the end. There's probably a bit of question around where Trent Rivers will find himself next year with the return of Christian Petrarca. Obviously, he played plenty of midfield minutes in his absence, but at full strength, there's no guarantee of him being afforded that same opportunity. However, if I was Simon Goodwin, I would definitely be giving him as much of a run there as possible because I thought he was very good in that second half of last season. He's becoming a very mature footballer and a level head, which I think they definitely need in that area of the ground. But even in spite of that maturity, he's at a fantastic age. Like, he's only 23. And once they phase out Viney and Track and Oliver, who are all a little bit older, Rivers will be in that perfect age. And if you pair him with Harvey Langford and Xavier Lindsay as those two develop, it could be terrific. Like, I just think the more Trent Rivers plays, the more reliable he's going to get. And I don't see any reason why, in building the next phase of this Melbourne midfield, that he shouldn't be right in the plans. Like, he's just the perfect player for that, in my opinion. But even then, he still has that ability to go back onto the halfback flank and contribute there and do an elite job as well. Like, even before they moved him into the midfield, I thought he was becoming a really good defender. So he's versatile as well. There are ways that they can use him. And I just think he could really be the best player in that team for sure, but one of the more reliable players in the comp. 2024, he averaged 21.3 disposals a game, 5.3 marks a game, and 2.6 clearances. And at 23 years old, I think he's going to improve on that a lot. Plenty to come for Trent Rivers for sure. North Melbourne, I've gone with Griffin Logue. The Roos felt like a bit of a difficult one to identify a player. They have their stars for sure. Larky's made the final team. Sheasel and Jerry made the extended squad last year. You know what you're getting from stars like LDU, but I felt like I had to pick someone who hasn't perhaps hit the heights we've expected. And obviously, it's not Griffin Logue's fault that he hasn't done what people might have expected him to do because he's been ravaged with injury over the last year. But he definitely has the quality and the scope to do so. And I think he'll go a very long way in terms of the progression of the entire side. If this year is finally the year that they make that jump, actually, even if it isn't this year, it could be any year, whenever it happens. But team defense is going to be such an important aspect of that climb. And Griffin Logue was taken from Freo to be a catalyst for North Melbourne's improvement in that area. He managed 15 games in 2023, only the two games for North this year, so he's been quite unlucky in terms of getting any consistency and being able to work in game with the young blokes that are around him. But if and when he gets that run at it in 2025, I have no doubt that when it comes to a player like him, what he will bring and what he does, you will see other players flourish because of it. All Australian would be a massive height to reach for a player like Griffin Logue at this point, but when you consider my parameters for this list, Griffin Logue is probably in that second bracket of North Melbourne players. And at 26 years old, there's definitely room for him to grow into. He's already a very good leader, but an elite leader and someone who would get noticed by selectors should he have enough of an impact. Like, I saw what Jeremy McGovern did for West Coast this year, and obviously McGovern is just like the best of the best in terms of key defenders, but that's the kind of impact as a leader that I would want to see Griffin Logue having on that defense, if that makes sense. In his two games in 2024, he averaged 12 disposals, 4.5 marks, and 7.5 spoils a game. So he's a very good player. And I think he'll definitely improve on that output as he gets that consistency next year for sure. Port Adelaide, I've gone with Miles Bergman. Now, Dan Houston's been the main man for Port Adelaide across that halfback flank for the last 2 or 3 years. And it translated brilliantly, not only for the team, but for him individually as well. He's two-time All-Australian, fantastic player for them week in, week out, but now he's gone. So where do you go from here if you're Port Adelaide? How do you make that transition? How do you make it seamless? How do you ensure that Houston's departure affects you in the smallest way possible? And I think the answer to that is Miles Bergman. They have other options for the other flank. They can go with whoever. I don't care. But I think Miles Bergman has to be their main man going forward on that halfback flank. Is he as quick as Houston? No. Is he as clean with the footy as Houston? Perhaps not. But he has all the ingredients to still be one of the league's best halfbacks right now. And I'm not talking about any sort of project with this one. I think he could and should do this in 2025. His role has been a little bit messy at times, but he's still a mainstay in the side, and now he'll really be able to lock down that role, that one role, with Houston gone. He's athletic, he's strong, he can defend, he's versatile as well, can play further up the ground, which he has a little bit, as I said. He's going to be someone that they'll be able to rely on at Port Adelaide. And if most of the transition out of that backline goes through Miles Bergman, I honestly don't know how much they'll be missing Dan Houston. Every chance I get proven wrong here, and he either doesn't play there, or it doesn't work, or they feel slightly more one-dimensional than they were with Houston. But I think I'm willing to back Bergman in here, for sure. And yeah, if he steps into that role and does it properly, what reason is there that he can't make that massive jump and be All-Australian? In my opinion. 2024, he averaged 15.7 disposals, 6.5 marks, and 77.9% disposal efficiency as well. So yeah, I think he has all the elements, in my opinion. There's no reason why he can't do it. Richmond, I've gone with Toby Nankervis. This one is probably the most borderline, if you want to call it that. But I can explain. Richmond are obviously in a terrible spot as far as all Australian players would go. It's not the time. It's not the time at all to speak about those for them at all. And as far as actual surprises would go, there aren't really many, if any, that are justifiable but not obvious in any sense. Like, I'm not going to come on here and say Tim Taranto because he's obviously an elite midfielder. I'm not going to say Tom Lynch because he's at his best one of the best key forwards in the comp. The closest, in my opinion, is their captain, Toby Nankervis. You're generally only going to get one or two rucks in the All Australian team at any given time. I think Toby is quality. He's very good. But for him to be the best ruck in the league, arguably in a year where his team is expected to probably be one of the worst in the comp, would be outstanding. And it would be a surprise. I would be surprised. He was a big part of their three premiership sides. Never got any real individual recognition from those. If anyone could do it now in this Richmond side's current form, maybe it's him. Because he will drag them through a lot of games, in my opinion. Realistically, from an individual perspective, his peak wasn't in those premiership years. His peak was probably these last couple of seasons where Richmond have struggled a little bit more. And he probably stands out in this Richmond side as well because he's a very consistent player at his best. We saw Tristan Jerry do this year, and he's a much less experienced player, like doing it in a worse offside and standing out as a ruckman. I'm not saying it's gonna happen, but it's probably the most justifiable one in this Richmond list. 2024, he averaged 16 disposals, 5.3 tackles, and 32.6 hitouts a game, which was a career high for him last year. So what's to say he can't improve again? I don't know. I think he's a very good player, and he's one of those players that kind of is getting better and more refined with age. Like, he's over 30 years old now, but I'm not one to say that he can't do it. St Kilda, I've gone with Liam Henry. When I was looking at St Kilda's list, trying to decide who to go with here, I came across Liam Henry, and I thought back to last season. And obviously, holistically, it's a bad example because he only managed 12 games in 2024 and it was injury interrupted in the end. But I thought back to one game in particular, and it was that Collingwood game in round three where he suffered that first injury of the year. I was there, and he was so impressive until he went down in that game. Just so good. And when I think about it, I truly wonder what sort of heights he could hit in a full, uninterrupted year for St Kilda. He came away with 14 touches and 2 goals in that one, in around 3 quarters. Does he have 20 to 25 per game and 1 or 2 goals every week in him at his best when he hits his straps? I think he could. That last year at Freo as well is an interesting one to look at. Playing on a wing almost entirely, he wasn't as impactful in front of goal, but his output on that wing was just superb in quite a few games there at the end. I just think his heights that he could hit would be truly endless. He has the potential to be fantastic. I'm not certain where his best footy lies positionally. As I said, he did play on a wing almost the entirety of that last season for Fremantle. A little bit more time forward at the Saints has seen him kick some goals. He was drafted as a forward by the Dockers, spent those early days there. I don't think there's a definitive answer really as to where he should be playing. I think he's just very versatile and you use that to your advantage. I really like him though. And I think he's got so much room for growth in the foreseeable depending on where they play him, for sure. 2024, he averaged 13.8 disposals, 5.1 score involvements, and 0.6 goals a game I've cited here, because that's likely where the improvement would need to come from if he's playing as a small forward. If he can up it to 1 or 2 goals a game, genuinely, he could be one of the elite small forwards in the comp. Sydney, another tough one because they obviously have so many elite players, but I feel like this one's very justifiable. I've gone with James Rowbottom. He's just about the best player on this list, I think, if you simply scan over it. He's probably also one of the league's most consistent players. Very impactful with what he brings defensively in that midfield. He does plenty for the Swans. Sydney were a hard team to pick a player for here, as I said, and I think what works in Jimmy's favour and what would make it a genuine surprise is the group of players that are playing around him. He's a midfielder. So firstly, he's got to compete with the elite players in the rest of the comp. But he's playing with Heaney, Goulden, and Warner. All three of them were all Australian in 2024, and they just stand out so much, and it's so hard to match their level and operate at an extremely high level. Could you imagine if they had four mids of that quality? Imagine it. Because I genuinely think James Rowbottom has the potential to bridge that gap one day. Does it happen imminently? Probably not, but if it were to happen, and as is the point of the whole list, it'd be a welcome surprise. I think year on year we've seen a pretty steady improvement from Rowbottom, purely from a numbers standpoint. He averaged 19 touches, which was a career high in 2024, just shy of 8 tackles a game last year, which was only less than Matt Rowell, and also a career high as well for him. I can't say exactly how much he needs to improve to shoot himself into consideration, but I think he definitely has it in him, and at that point, he'd probably be the best defensive-minded midfielder in the league. In fact, he'd definitely be. And as I said, we see the levels that Errol and Chad and Heaney have in that side. So he definitely has a standard to try and match as well in terms of the improvement that he needs. As I said before, average 19 disposals in 2024, 7.8 tackles a game, which was only second to Matt Rhea, and 27.8 pressure acts as well, which is elite and only second to Matt Rhea. So just unbelievable. And if he improves, yeah, very good. West Coast is an interesting one. I've gone with Ryan Marrick, very intriguing player. The justification for him is very dependent on where he plays. Obviously, he spent his first 2 years at the Eagles as a tall forward. That's what they drafted him as. And he's shown plenty of potential to this point, but he's also a very versatile player, clearly. And he can push up the ground, he can impact elsewhere, he's quick for his size, very skillful, and it's now been floated that he may fill a hole in defence for West Coast in 2025. It seems like a lot of fans are keen to see it. I hope they do it because they have some fantastic tall forwards ahead of him as well. Oscar Allen, they'd be hoping, will be fully fit and able to contribute. Jake Waterman's coming off a career best year. Jack Williams will definitely play. And Jack Hutchinson's waiting in the wings as well. So I think Ryan's skill set could definitely suit that defensive role with how athletic he is. I think it could be very good. At just 20 years old, I think there's a real opportunity here for the Eagles to mold this guy into something really special as a defender. And in a rebuilding lineup, I look at their list of young players who are just sort of finding their way and working out where their best football lies. And he's one that really stands out to me as someone who could announce himself and do some real damage in the next year or two. I definitely think that with Barrask gone, there's space for guys like him and Harry Edwards to take the bull by the horns and really do something here. They have a real opportunity for sure. 2024, he averaged 9.7 disposals a game, 3.2 marks a game, and 73.5% disposal efficiency, which is really good for a big man and would work really, like, he's clearly very good with the football in hand, which would bode well for him as a defender. Like that, those are the kind of qualities you want in a more athletic defender moving the ball out of the back line. I think he could be very good for them in that position if they choose to go with it. And finally, for the Western Bulldogs, I've gone with Rory Lobb. You wouldn't have been wrong for thinking earlier this year that this guy's career was pretty much done. Like, he wasn't getting games, wasn't at the level when he was getting them, and it was just a complete mess. And then Bevo decided to try him out as a defender. I don't remember what triggered this. I don't know why they did this. Maybe they needed a player back there. I can't remember if they're injuries or not. I don't know. But they did it. And it worked. Because he's now just about the most important defender at the Dogs, in my opinion. There were times last year that people had Liam Jones in all Australian calculations. And he was very good. But I think when Lobb got moved back there, he was as good as him, if not better, in my opinion. And he should continue to be at that level. Obviously, there are some fantastic key defenders in this league, and it would be quite a big ask for him to match it up to those players on a more consistent basis. But I don't see any reason why that's impossible in a Bulldog side that, while they might not do as good as they did in 2024, they should be expected to do pretty well again because the team is still there. Like, it's a very good squad across the board. So in a good team, why can't he have those performances again? And he's not particularly, like, he's 31 years old, but I don't particularly feel like he's old, if that makes sense. Like, there are a lot of 31-year-olds that you'd think, yeah, he's getting on a bit. But I think he's still got a couple of very good years ahead of him, Rory Lobb. There's no reason why he can't do it. 2024, he averaged 13.6 disposals, 5.4 marks, and 5.1 intercepts a game in a season where he was only a defender for half of it. So he should improve on those numbers as well, going into next year, spending a full year as a defender, in my opinion. So that's it for that list. Let's go back through and rename every player and recap. Adelaide, I've gone with Riley Thilthorpe. Brisbane, I've gone with Kai Lohman. Carlton, Blake Acres. Collingwood, Harry Perryman. Essendon, Jai Caldwell. Freo, Heath Chapman. It's happening, mark my words. Geelong, Sean Manor. Gold Coast, Bodie Hewland. GWS, I've gone with Finn Callaghan. Hawthorn, Connor McDonald. Melbourne, Trent Rivers. North, Griffin Logue. Port, Miles Bergman. Richmond, Toby Nankervis. St Kilda, Liam Henry. Sydney, James Rowbottom. West Coast, Ryan Marich. And the Bulldogs, I've gone with Rory Lobb. Nice. That is it. Give me some feedback. Tell me what players you would have had for your club. Tell me what players you'd have for other clubs. Give me a player for every club. Who do you think is going to make the All-Australian team next year that would be considered a surprise, in your opinion? I'd love to hear it. But that was a fun one. I enjoy doing this kind of stuff. We'll do more of this kind of stuff leading into 2025. But for now, that is it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. If you're on YouTube, give us a like and subscribe. If you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, give us a follow and a rating on there because those always help. All the social links are in the description as they always are. Check those out, give them a follow, run them up. And until next week, we'll be back for another one, and I will see you then.